Yo, these edibles ain't shit.
Test 1, 2.
Okay, first things first, I kind of hate doing this, but I do feel like to participate in this conversation, you should be required to demonstrate the ability to drive your way out of a paper bag. So, here is my certificate of not being completely ass at this game. Now, having said that, even though I do like this rating system more than World Match, I think it does a better job of assessing player ability. That number is kind of untrustworthy. The big obvious reason is that if you're playing at hours where there aren't many high-rated players online, you are basically just crawling into the 7-mile spanking machine and asking to get your rating taken. So of course, people are just disconnecting in the lobby phase if they don't see enough Emerald rankers in there, because you are not penalized any rating, and you don't even lose fair play points. Now, don't get me wrong, I think it's based that when you lose to people worse than you lose like 30 rating in one shot. I think that fucking rules. In Emerald lobbies, you can absolutely tell that people are playing risk-averse and a little bit more tactical. They're trying to set themselves up well to push on the final straight, and things are usually relatively quiet until the back half of lap 3. In gold lobbies, it's just 9/11. And that makes sense, but what I didn't expect was the considerable gap in overall driving ability. Like, you get a way better sense for what sets are actually capable of at their peak when the people playing them can actually control their character. So on the one hand, I think I've managed to surprise a good amount of people with how resilient and scary Big Idiot actually is to be staring at in your rear view. On the other hand, I have been doing a lot of thinking about Ultimate Charge, because holy... In World Match, it's usually pretty uncommon to see multiple strong Ultimate Charge players in the same room, because it's usually pretty uncommon to see multiple strong players of any kind in the same room. So Legend Competition has introduced me to The Wall, groups of 4 to 8 Ultimate Charge users that can't hurt each other, don't usually want to try, and are all benefiting from slipstream speed in a way that a single frontrunner doesn't. That's a pretty challenging target to keep pace with, and it is made all the more challenging by their effects on the rest of the race. Between race flow, gadget adjustments, and stronger players, this version of the game has a tendency to feel extremely random. I can handle quite a lot of randomness. I actually play a lot of Riichi Mahjong, which is a game where if you sat 4 strong players down at a table, they would have to play about 100 games before you could reliably tell who was the better player. That probably seems like kind of an unreasonable amount of variance, but it's taught me to be very zen when bad things outside of my control happen to me in video games. But that has limits. If you asked me to crack open a pack of playing cards and play some War with you, I would tell you to kick rocks. Extremely random games can still provide a lot of interesting ways for players to improve their odds, and a lot of consistent games can often feel pretty unrewarding to play competitively. So, what separates players from one another in Crossworlds? Well, there's your machine and gadget setup. Obviously, the ability to identify and use strong combinations is a skill. But that's a skill that is almost entirely replicated by Googling top Crossworlds builds 2025 free download. You still obviously need to understand how your setup changes your incentives, but this stuff isn't private information. You can literally just look at top plates. There's overall item play, the idea of using an item to advance your position versus holding on to it for the final stretch, when to attack versus when to hold back, the ability to block items on reaction, awareness of the threats around you, and an understanding of when to preemptively activate things like Tornado. These are also meaningful and important skills. but they're narrow skills that you use in more of a general rules of application sense than actually playing an individual situation, because the netcode can't really be trusted to tell you where players are or what they're doing. And in particular, if the person in front of you is using ultimate charge, the decision of when to attack them is relatively narrow. There's course knowledge, what turn is coming up next, where are the shortcuts, which split path should I prefer, and this interacts with item play a bit, but on the whole it's largely static. Once you've fully learned a course, there's not really much more for you to apply. And last and most importantly, there is driving, your baseline ability to move the car. The other aspects of play that have been discussed are usually pretty discrete. They have a finite number of answers and there's usually a correct one. But driving is very granular. There's basically always something you can do to save time, especially in a match practical setting, even if the time save is 1/10 of a second or less. So when players have started to reach the upper boundary of what the game allows in every other sense, they'll be separated mostly by their driving skill. And their driving skill should be primarily what determines their final race results. So with that in mind, let me ask you this. How does this image make you feel? Sonic Racing Crossworlds is like a party game on the outside, but tuned like a fully skill-based racing game on the inside. I think there's a temptation to look at this headline and answer very simply, no, it fucking isn't. But remember that when players start to plateau, the skill that matters the most is driving. And driving has that peculiar quality where the more time you invest into it, the smaller your improvements get. In your first few runs of a time trial, you might save 5, 10, 15 seconds in a single run. But as you improve over hours and hours, you'll eventually be fighting for 0.1 second time saves. And that's fine, a lot of people find that deeply rewarding. But in races, no matter how small the driving gap is, items take away a flat amount of time. You can drive for hundreds of hours to secure a 1-second advantage, only for a green glove to take away 3. So players adjust their approach. They don't run fast sets, they run safe sets. They run quick recovery, they run slipstreamers, they run ultimate charge. It seems obvious, if items matter less, then my driving will matter more. But when players are close together, they slipstream, and with no mechanism to push them apart, players slipstream a lot more. And slipstream speed, like item stun, is static. At high levels of play, it doesn't just offset differences in driving ability, it erases them. Because the driving gap is so different, it cannot be tuned to function the same way for beginners and experts. You can actually try this for yourself, by the way. Invite a couple of friends to friend match, turn every item off except for 100 ring, and see what happens. If you and your friends are even relatively close in driving ability, and none of you make major errors like wall scraping, it won't just be back and forth, it'll be bumper to bumper for all 3 laps. So, is ultimate charge the problem? In one sense, yes. It's strong, it's extremely overrepresented in competition play, and it's the most potent enabler of this bad game environment that we've now talked about. But if it got banned tomorrow and banished to the warp ring dimension, these problems would still exist, because it's not the only set or system contributing to the ecosystem. Slipstream would still be powerful, comeback items would still give strong players way more mobility than they need, ending shortcuts would still be disproportionately important, Slipstream Bounty would still be one of the best sources of speed in the entire game and available only to people who are behind. But the pack would almost certainly spread out a little bit, and we'd see fewer breakaway front runs that saturate the rest of the race with high power items. But in that environment, where the only consistent answer to first place hate has been removed from the game, being in first starts to look like a pretty raw deal. Sega said it themselves. They want every position to be able to win. So there's more to that interview than just a baffling headline. In particular, there's some talk about balance, and while I can't read Japanese, cross-referencing a handful of machine translations here, the gist is pretty clear. Perfect balance is usually flat, uninteresting. If everything is equally good, there's not much reason to pick something over something else. Kohayakawa talks about a sharpness, And I think a lot of my favorite games end up being designed in this way. Designed with the aim of making options that feel strong and distinct, rather than perfectly balanced. If people have a set or a strategy or a character that gives them something they love, that they feel they can't get anywhere else, they're not going to be particularly concerned about balance, and in fact, they might hallucinate balance where none exists. No offense to this person, this was an extremely common belief. And in Crossworlds, Ultimate Charge is sort of the sharpest thing that there is. For players reaching Legend rank, frustrated by the amount of chaos that keeps ruining their races, Ultimate Charge represents a huge opportunity. In this kind of setup, driving skill doesn't just give you millisecond improvements, it gives you the completely unique ability to blow through first place hate, to ignore mid-pack scrambles, to hold your position. And when you get hit, it doesn't feel like a random event. It feels like you could have played better. So of course this conversation was going to become contentious. On one side of the room, you have the larger player base watching top-level competition become the fucking realm of angels untouchable by mortal men. On the other hand, you have people who practice a skill that they enjoy using, that gives them agency over the game that they wouldn't have otherwise, watching people talk about how it should be taken away and replaced with nothing. It's completely natural to look at this extremely screwed up chaotic environment and go, hello, I would like a little bit more agency in my final placement, please. The designers obviously understand this, and so they wanted to treat Ultimate Charge with a pretty light touch for the first adjustments. That's an understandable desire, but it did not work. Ultimate Charge is still at like 95% leaderboard usage, and it's contributing to some pretty obvious ecosystem problems, so something has to be done. From here, I see three possible paths. The most likely path is that Sega will just hit Ultimate Charge with progressively more nerfs until it falls into line. Higher slot cost, lower invincibility duration, maybe even something oddball like removing its immunity to dropping rings so that it can be slowed down by wall scrapes and collisions. The aim would be to keep the build largely the same, but make it slightly more vulnerable to items or traditional overtakes, or both. It's the simplest option, but it might disappoint a lot of people and leaves a lot of the structural problems intact. The second possibility is a change to the environment. People obviously don't use Ultimate Charge in time trials, they use stuff like Perfect Charge Bounty. And if items dragged players back less often, faster builds would be much more likely to be able to overtake Ultimate Charge users before drowning to something else. I consider this unlikely because it's a dangerous option. Less item offense means a closer pack means more active slipstream. Without some mechanism to break slipstreams and separate players, driving matters even less. And weakening slipstream would heavily affect gadget balance and hurt beginner players. But if Legend competition is for anything, it should be for making balance changes for competition, right? If it's their intention, Sega could create a version of this game that rewards skilled driving more for all players, not just for Ultimate Chargers. Now, unfortunately for my pie-in-the-sky dreams of the funniest possible design, there is probably no reason for Sega to take the third option here. It introduces a lot of risk and creates a lot of work and risks destabilizing the game environment completely, when you could make Ultimate Charge a 3-slot gadget in probably one line of code and then just clock out for the day. But when Kohayakawa talks about sharpness, it makes me wonder, what would the game look like if there were more sets that were as strong as Ultimate Charge? What if the underplayed speed machines became huge overtake threats in a straight line? What if Spin Drift was so disruptive that it could be used to defend a lead? What if the acceleration stat did literally anything at all? What if there were new strong tools that did new types of things? I figure I'm probably not the only person who's disappointed with gadget variety right now. Not just because of Ultimate Charge, but because entire categories of gadget have effectively disappeared. Tuners have barely any effect, Slipstream Bounty is overwhelmingly the strongest form of ring generation, and oddball gadgets like Friction Drift or Super Slow Starter are basically asking to lose. Now, not every gadget should be strong at top levels. A relevant version of Monster Truck Starter would probably just make the game less fun for everyone. And in the current framework of the game, some gadgets can't be made strong. A lot of item-related gadgets fall flat just because it's difficult to use them in an environment with such poor netcode. But I look at the way that Ultimate Chargers talk about their set in discussions, and I wonder, what would the game be like if everyone had a set they felt so strongly about? What if the game could be sharpened even further? Now, I'm not naive enough to believe that this video will affect the final balance, and I don't want that responsibility even if I could have it. But the latest balance patch is so fucking confusing and unorthodox that these thoughts have just kind of been swirling around in my head with nowhere to go. I don't play much Ultimate Charge, and right now, I've been having some kind of dark thoughts about whether it's even good to be in first place at all, and it feels sort of insane that I'm capable of questioning that on a build that's basically designed to hold its position. It's frustrating to feel this way, and I don't want other people to feel this way either. So yes, I think Ultimate Charge needs to change, but if it's the only thing that changes, I wonder if the game will be worse off instead of better. Wait, why isn't Legend Competition at supersonic speed? How did I write this entire video and not think of that?